Hello, this is Stephen with MCNC's Vital Cybersecurity team, and today we're going to be going over a little bit of the CrowdStrike console. We're going to be jumping into the Falcon Discover component, and sort of what you see on the sidebar here are the assets, accounts, and application sections we'll be jumping into. So please do follow along in your console. This is going to be in a smaller test lab environment where we don't have a domain setup, so some of these things aren't going to be as fully featured as they will be in your environment, especially if you're a larger environment with thousands or tens of thousands of devices. But to begin with, we'll jump into the Assets dashboard. So, when you're inside the Assets dashboard, it's important to understand where this information comes from. CrowdStrike runs on the devices themselves, and as such, it collects and has visibility into a lot of information about the hosts it's running on. That information's piped into here into various dashboards. That way you can gain an understanding of your environment, and you can try and prioritize and preempt some things that I'll get into in a moment. So, at the top here we have managed assets, unmanaged assets, and unsupported assets. Important to note that a managed asset here is one that has CrowdStrike deployed to it. It's running CrowdStrike, it's happy, it's healthy, it's doing what we want it to. Unmanaged assets are those that could receive CrowdStrike but do not. So in some of our environments where student devices are Windows, Mac, or Linux and they're not allowed to have CrowdStrike on them, they're not licensed, then that might be where you would see some unmanaged assets. You'll also see unmanaged assets as devices that might have missed during an automated deployment, or they could be devices that are shadow IT, so you have a protected network for your faculty and somebody brought in their own personal device, put it on that faculty network. That's a no-no. That should be a protected network for just secured devices. So that's how you would use that. Unsupported assets are those that cannot receive CrowdStrike. So think your IoT devices, your game consoles, and anything else really outside of that core Windows, Mac, Linux that we're licensed for. Of course, you'll have other dashboard readouts here, such as assets by OS version and end of support. So that will be if you have some older versions of Windows 10 that are no longer supported by Microsoft or by CrowdStrike, they'll start to pop up here. You have managed assets by data provider. So really, this is just going to show CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is branching out into the XDR market. So if you had other integrations here in your environment, that would be where they're at. Then down here by asset type, just again, a graphical form of what we've already talked about. Managed assets by platform. This is good to see your ebb and flow of Windows, Mac, Linux. And by device type, here we just have workstations, but if you had Windows Server, those would populate workstation versus server. Down here, if you had any Windows Server in your environment, you would see Server 2016, 2019, 2022. That would be here. And this is where we start getting into how we can leverage this information. So if we look down here, we see managed assets by model, we see server version, we see Windows version, and all this does is let us understand what's in our environment. So say that we had some Windows 7 down here, we would get a bar chart just like we have for Windows 10, and we could start to scope out, okay, I have 7 Windows 7 devices, I need to upgrade those. I have 4 Windows 10 devices, I need to get that onto Windows 11. Similar thing with macOS version. macOS 10.15 loses CrowdStrike support December 31st, 2022. So if you're looking at this when it goes live in November and you see any Mac 10.15 down here, you know you need to be very quick in upgrading those and getting them on to, preferably at least Monterey or Ventura, where you'll have a few more years of support on them. Again, similar thing for Linux. Getting down here to model, this is where you would see your hardware model. So because these are all VMs, we just see VMware virtual machine. However, if this was a hardware, you would have a ThinkPad version or a Mac version, and that's all information you can use in the event that a specific hardware model has a vulnerability or a specific hardware model is about to go end of life. This is where you can reference that. Of course, Jumping in further, we have system resources. System resources is valuable because you start to see an idea of your CPU processors, your core counts, so you can understand, is that a really old processor on that machine, or is this something that's a little bit under-resourced that I need to pay some attention to? Maybe some of the machines in the lab are getting a little bit long in the tooth, and I need to focus on prioritizing getting them upgraded to a sufficient level. That's really what we have here. If you click into any of these, that'd be a Windows. It'll show up a usage graph of CPU, memory. It'll show a little bit more information about the storage. Really all the information here. That way you can gain an understanding of if a user calls in saying their device is slow, then, sometimes that could be a web page isn't loading quickly because of an internet issue, or it could be an under-resourced device. Or you can come in here, click into there, see that CPU graph, see that memory graph, and understand, is it a machine that's just running hot and the internet's fine, or maybe it's a network issue because the machine's showing low utilization. Going down further, we have drive encryption. So obviously drive encryption is important because if a user's laptop is stolen, if you have a faculty machine that has a lot of sensitive information on it, that machine gets stolen by a student or somebody else, then obviously you're in a scenario where if that hard drive's taken out, information's gathered, you may have to report the loss of that information. You may have to deal with all of that blowback. Here, however, we can see that you get an idea of unencrypted drives, the C drive here on these the Mac machine, these two. You have yes, so this is aware of Windows and Mac. And you can really just use either Windows BitLocker or macOS File Vault to ensure that your devices are encrypted. We have OS security features, so going beyond just understanding if your device is running the proper CrowdStrike policy, we can ensure that the operating system itself is tightened up as much as possible. Things like ensuring secure boot's enabled on your Windows devices, that should be a default for most of them. Ensuring, all of the other settings and little minor tweaks that you can configure your devices with are properly enabled ends up being very important, and you can get a view of that in your environment. This goes more into a zero trust, type of concept. However, it is here for you to parse and gain visibility into. Next up, we'll look at our BIOS overview, which again just gives an idea of which BIOSes are out in our environment. We'll start to see other information. Again, we're looking in a lab environment, so the information here is not really fleshed out as much as it would be in your environment once you've gotten deployed to all of your devices. However, making sure that your BIOS is secure and updated accordingly as needed is very important. We'll skip over BIOS analysis because same thing, it'll be a little bit thin. However, next we'll go into the accounts dashboard. So when we look at the accounts dashboard, this is really powerful because while CrowdStrike's not sitting on your domain controller pulling information from AD, it is sitting on your devices, so it's getting information from the perspective of those devices. Again, I hate saying it, but this is a lab environment. We just have local accounts. But in your environment where you're going to have domain admins, those are the ones with keys to the kingdom. Those are the accounts you want to really track down, keep track of, make sure that everything's, operating as intended. With that, and a lot of CrowdStrike has these, they've got various toggles up here. You would click account type, you would have domain right here. So you could click domain, suddenly you see all your domain accounts. You can make sure that your domain password reset policy is being followed. You can make sure that those domain accounts are not showing up here under failed login. You could then go further and click admin privileges and click yes. Now all of a sudden you'll see your domain admins. These charts will update accordingly, and then you can really check to make sure that you don't have 1 or 2 failed logins for a domain admin. A fat finger's fine, but if you start seeing 10, 15, 20, 100 failed logins for one of your domain admin accounts, that's where you need to start digging in and investigating. However, just looking across everything here as we see, we've got local admin, local user. You'd be able to see if you had your domain admins, your domain users here. you'd be able to see assets with most logins. So obviously, if there's a script that's going wrong and it's constantly timing out, you may see really inflated numbers here. Important stuff to look at and explain. If you look at something you're curious, that's what the security operations team is here for. We don't look at this and proactively monitor this. However, we're always here to answer questions. You just email us at secops@mcnc.org. Give us a screenshot. Give us as much information as possible. We're happy to help look in your environment and try and work through what's going on. Similar thing with most logins by usernames. If you have anybody who's just head and shoulders above the rest, they're logging in 10,000 times, then that's an account you need to investigate. If these are successful logins, then, what's going on? Is somebody compromised their account, or is somebody sharing an account? What could be going on there? And of course, you get logins by login type. You have interactive hands-on keyboard, if they're authenticating against a terminal server or something, if they're logging in that way, or if they've got cached credentials because it's an AD account and it's just off network. Going down into applications, we'll start off with installed applications by host. So this is really handy because CrowdStrike's on your device. CrowdStrike knows and can pull the information of what applications are installed when they were installed into a single searchable database here. And this is important because especially for schools that have exam software, you may need to make sure that you're running Safe Exam Browser version 10.1. And you can go in here before test time and you can see specifically what versions of software you're running, when they were installed, which host they're installed on. And this is really powerful because say you need version 10.1 of Safe Exam Browser and you come in here and you see 10.0 is installed, then you can easily go up here and start searching for, the application and the version and narrow your search down. And then anytime you see something that looks like a CSV or an Excel file, you can always export it as such, get it as a CSV, XML, JSON, manipulate it as you wish, or just give it to your techs at the different schools. That way they can go out and update accordingly, and you're not having to give them access to the console. Of course, we'll look at application usage because there's a little bit of difference here. Installed applications are just that, applications that are installed. However, if you start looking at application usage, this is actually what's being ran by those machines. By default, it shows 7 days, but this is what we'll use for making sure that antiviruses have been uninstalled. So if you've just uninstalled antiviruses yesterday, make sure you set this to 24 hours. But we'll run in just this way for Win1. We'll set it to 7 days. We'll hit submit. We'll give this a second to run. And we can see that, okay, this device is running CrowdStrike. It's got this application. And we can start to see that, hosts that have used this app. So this would show us all of the Windows devices that are using basically what matches CS Falcon Container 6.47. Or we could see all that did not use the app. So again, going back to Safe Exam Browser, if you come in here and you find hosts that are running Safe Exam Browser and they're all applicable and you see 10.0, you would click hosts that are using 10.0. If you want to go through here and click hosts that have, say, 10.1, and you click view hosts that do not have that app, you would get an instance of all of your CrowdStrike installed machines that do not have that browser installed. So really useful information. Play around with it. Again, any questions, secops@mcnc.org. We're here to help you out. The Legacy Discover pages here are basically a lot of what we've already seen. It's just as CrowdStrike constantly evolves their services. If you've looked at some of our older videos and you liked one thing or another, recommend you to figure out a workflow with the new options because CrowdStrike may or may not continue to support these Legacy Discover pages. However, they are there for the time being. All right, so as always, Stephen with the Vital Cyber Security Operations team at MCNC. If you have any questions, we're here 24/7, 365. It's secops@mcnc.org. Thank you. If you enjoyed the video, please do make sure to share it out with folks in your cohort or anybody you think it could be useful to. We're all in this migration journey together. And always remember, if you have any questions, we're here to help, and you know how to get a hold of us.